Hi, this is Barb Wallace. Welcome to Step Into the Story. You might notice I'm missing my partner in crime, Donna Allward. She unfortunately has an illness and had to cancel today, but I'm very excited because our author is Kimberly Brock.
Hello.
The award-winning author of, here we go, The River Witch, The Lost Book of ELEANOR Dare, which I loved, and the recently released The Fabled Earth. She's also the founder of the Tinderbox Writers Retreat, which helps aspiring writers find their unique voices. We're so excited. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here, Miss.
I cannot tell you.
I was Barbara. I called you Donna.
That's okay. But we're interchangeable. So before, it's only been out a few weeks, and I was checking the ratings, and it's definitely sneaking upward.
It's doing okay. I'm so glad it's finding readers. You know, it's a quiet little Southern story. I write. I think I grew up reading those big, like 1980s, 1990s Southern historical novels. And so I write like that. And you don't find those books everywhere now. Everything's very fast paced. So I'm glad when people like to just kind of slide into a nice Southern story with me.
It's a good Southern story too. Just so people who aren't familiar with it, it's 1932 in Cumberland Island is where the opulence of the Gilded Age is just about faded. It's towards the end. And there's the Carnegie family has a home there, and there's a group of people gathered for a summer, including a local girl who's been hired as a companion to another woman. And what happens is there's a tragedy that occurs on the island that then marks the next 20 years. And then the other half of the book is in 1959, there's a reclusive painter named Chloe Woodbine who you discover is the woman from the party. And she's lived alone. She's visited by a man who saved her life 30 years earlier. And suddenly the stories from the past become rushing back, and she's forced to confront all the things that happened that she's been trying to ignore for 20 something years. And then meanwhile, there's also two other women. There's Frances, who's the daughter of one of the women who was involved in 1932's tragedy. And then Audrey Howell, who's tangential, but ends up being connected to everything. So I have to be honest with you. After I read the book, I'm kind of torn between being in awe and kind of hating you for being so good. Because
you're sweet.
I seriously could not put this book down. We had a business dinner last night, and I was mad at my husband because I had to go to the dinner. I said, I want to finish this book. And he's like, oh, sorry, but you have to go to my dinner. So it's a very intricate, complex, multi-textured novel. I mean, I was looking at all the themes, and you have death and rebirth, forgiveness, mothers and daughters, letting go of the past, change, racism, and the power of story, which is the whole fable thing. And I was likening it this morning to my husband. I said, it's kind of like, I don't know if you crochet. Okay, so it's kind of like if you had a whole bunch of granny squares, and then you put them together and created a much bigger, beautiful object. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you managed to create this big, complex story, and how it inspired. How you were inspired to write all these different moving pieces that then connected together.
I could sit and listen to you talk about it all day long. You make me sound good. It's funny because you are right on top of it. Like when I started writing this book, I thought I was writing a very small story with a very tight lens.
Mm-hmm.
And I did, but for a lot of characters, right? And so then it becomes this bigger thing, a broader theme to the whole of the story. And I really wanted to think about ghost stories. I had said, I was teaching a workshop at the Pat Conroy Center, and I said to the group that I believed all stories were ghost stories. And I thought, I'm so smart. That sounds so smart. And then I thought, what does that even mean? Do I really believe that? And I do, but why? So what I was doing was I was taking that question and giving it to these characters, each of them. And I thought I was only giving it to my main characters, but it turns out I kind of gave it to everybody in the book to see, what does that really mean? What do you think about that? And Cleo Woodbine, the main character, her grandfather says this to her when she's a little girl. So as an adult, she's also kind of grappling with that question on the page.
Yep.
And that's kind of how it broke down into who I needed to populate this fictional setting. It's a real place, but the story is all fiction. And then, the backdrop. Cumberland Island's just crazy, beautiful, spooky, wonderfully Southern Gothic. And then you drop Gilded Age mansions in the middle of that. And it's so unlikely and so wonderful. And the history is vast and long and complicated. And so it turned into the spirit of the book is this long, complicated, cyclical history in the background of these smaller, more intense individual stories that are going on.
Yeah, and they're all we should say it's all interconnected like a web. And I kind of envisioned like your plot board looking like one of those murder boards.
Yeah.
Like your yarn,
that's kind of how my life looks, Donna.
But I mean, if you think about it, in a small town,
I called you Donna again.
That's okay.
I know you.
It's okay. She's I live in a small town, so it's like everything that happens is connected to everything else. So nothing is isolated. So even though they think that they're the only one experiencing it,
right,
you realize that no, they're all tied together, and they're tied together in such unexpected ways, which I love.
Exactly. I think that was the theme when it came down to it, was the fact that each of these people have their own folklore, their own fable that they're living, because we live in such an insulated, as human beings, we're in our own heads, right? And we don't realize how connected we are. And the thing that connects us is story. All of our stories connect us with one another. So yeah, you got it.
Yeah, well, I was curious though, why did you have two timelines? You have the 1950s timeline where everyone's, you identify who the people are. And then you go back to 32 and it's Cleo's story and it's in Cleo's point of view. Right. But you call it fable. What is that? Is that because that's the story she's telling her, or what made you decide to call it fable?
I think that it's because it's the story that she's telling. It's how she perceived it. And it kind of changes as an adult when she learns all the facts. By the end, she realizes the story that she's been telling herself her whole life has not actually been true. It's just been a fable. It's a cautionary tale. She knows that. Don't do what I did, right? And she lives by that. She's exiled herself because of it, but she doesn't understand all the facts. And I was really playing with that a lot in a lot of the storyline, and trying to look at difficult pieces of history too. The reason that the second part of the novel is set in 1959 is because true history, the largest mansion, the largest winter home that the Carnegies built on Cumberland Island in the 1880s was called Dungeness. And it burned in an arson in 1959, and nobody was ever charged with that crime. They're still not sure who exactly perpetrated that. They believe it was poachers that were in contention with the Carnegies there on the island. And that I wanted that backdrop of that spectacular fire for the end of the book. So historically, making that choice, then I had to look at 1959 and what was going on in little small towns. And there's a lot of social change, but it's just starting to cook, and the characters can only know what they know in 1959. And that was very interesting for me to build this little imaginary town that looks like exactly what you'd expect to find on the coast of Georgia, with your library and your little movie theater. And it looks very pleasant, and everybody looks like they're getting along. And there was a lot of fun with the music and the themes. And then to throw it back to 1932, and those mansions are already beginning to disintegrate at that point. The money is gone. And so I liked, transposing those two against one another. But that's why those two time periods were chosen.
Oh, okay. All right. So now your book is about I said three women, but I was thinking about it. It's really about four women. Because there's Joanne, who her fate is known very quickly. But it's hard to talk about this without spoiling it. But She doesn't have a point of view, but she plays a major role, and she's there for the whole book. I mean, like,
Yeah.
her presence is known, but all of them grow, even her, grow from very young and naive to very strong, independent women that kind of carved a life for
Yeah.
themselves their way.
Right.
So we always say that we loved all our characters equally, but I have to ask if you had a favorite story. Was there one of the storylines more favorite than others? Did you love one more than the others, or are you going to tell me you loved them all?
It's one of those things where, like, you love the one you're with. So when I'm writing the one I'm writing in point of view, at the time that I'm writing, that point of view is the one I think. And I'm always afraid one or the other is going to take off with the book. My secondary characters tend to take off with the book if I'm not careful, because I struggle with liking my main characters usually. I think it's like when you're a parent and you can see this potential, you know what they should be, and you want them to get there faster than they do. And so I struggle with my main characters. I never write what people would call likable characters. I find them boring. I usually write somebody that's kind of difficult to deal with, and then that makes my job hard, because the character is hard to know and hard to write in a way that's easy to relate to for the reader. So I don't necessarily, my favorite character while I'm writing the book is never the main character, but when I'm finished with the book, it is. So it changes as I go. Like when I'm finished, I'm so satisfied because they get to some sort of change at the end, and I feel like, oh, now I know you, and we're so close now. You know, like I had to work hard for it.
Why did you say they're not relatable? Because well, I guess Cleo is prickly.
She is, and she was hard to know.
But she's got very good reasons, and as the book unfolds, you start liking her a lot more.
I love that scene, though. I think my favorite scene is the scene with her and Joanna when they're at the ocean together, and they share a moment where they're in the water.
Oh yeah,
together. And because it's very complicated, these two girls, young women who would seem to be very different, and they are very different, but they are also exactly the same, and they are sort of in love with one another, the idea of the other one. And at the same time, they resent one another equally. Yep. And so that was a really fun female dynamic, because I've experienced that. And I know so many women who talk about that person that you just hate, but you just love, and you admire things about them, and you're jealous of things about them. And then when you get to know them, you realize they're sad things, but they're complicated, right?
Yep.
And so that one scene had so much of that bubbling in it. I really enjoyed writing that.
And it's funny because they both ended up Joanne ended up getting so much of what she envied, that by sort of just by circumstance more than anything.
Yeah. They both kind of get it by get what they want, but is it really? And I like the fact that all of the characters, not just the female characters, but all of my characters are very atypical people. Yep. They all are in a place where they don't feel they fit. They don't fit the mold. None of them do. And I intentionally did that with my main characters, and then I sort of scooted back when it was done, and I thought, well, it kind of applies to everybody. And then I realized, because it's true, nobody's typical. And that's what I'm trying to show in this book. I think that none of us fit the mold. None of us do. But there's a place for all of us.
And there's also a very strong theme about mothers and daughters, especially in the fact that you don't know what you think is your mother is not the mother you know, or the mother you know, not the mother that exists.
It's true.
I only know my mother as my mother. I know my son only knows me as, for the 30 years he's known me. He has no idea what I was like out of his sight.
True.
And these women discover that and and they learn from it. They get strength and they learn what they've come from. And I thought that was there's a couple scenes. I think the scene where Audrey sees her mother for the first time is something other than this woman who joined the Junior League, and it's implied that the mother kind of gave up the love of her life and had no choice. There's a lot of implications there, and I loved that. And then I was going to say, there are two other characters that we're not talking about. I mean, there are the men, And again,
Who are so confused. These poor guys are so confused in this book.
they
1959
are.
was confusing.
Well, 'cause I think it was a whole bunch of characters who loved where they were,
Yeah.
but didn't love the circumstances in their life, but said, you know what, I got to make the best of it. And here I am home, and this is where I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
But the two other characters I'm thinking about, and I say this because Donna and I both have this absolute love when the setting is a character.
Mhm.
So I would say that Cumberland Island really was a setting, and so was the water, the river, or the
Yeah.
sea, or whatever. And so my question is, because they really are living and breathing to me. And so my question was, how much did you know about the area before you start, or did you have to go and spend a lot of time there?
So I grew up, I know you can't tell just listening to this accent, right? I grew up in the foothills of North Georgia. So Appalachian foothills. But my dad had a best friend who had a home on St. Simon's Island.
Okay.
So another barrier island off the coast of Georgia. And that's the first place I went as a child to go to the beach. One of my very earliest memories is holding my dad's hand on one side and his hand on the other, and them jumping me over waves on the shore of St. Simon's. So I grew up going down there some, and I've always loved it. And he brought books to my mom. He brought Southern fiction books to my mom, and those were some of the first novels that I read. So my love of story and place and Southern fiction is all bound up in those two places. And the folklore and the storytelling that I grew up with in the foothills, I mean, even in church, and then down on St. Simon's Island on the coast. And for Cumberland, I had never been there. But I had always wanted to go. And my husband and I got married in 1996, and we got married. I grew up on a farm. I grew up on a farm, 100-year-old house, 100-year-old oak tree, and we got married in the backyard. There were 25 people there in folding chairs. 2 little ladies from church made pound cake. And it was very intimate and sweet, and I loved it. And then 3 months later, we learned with the rest of the world that JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette had been married in a secret wedding on Cumberland Island.
Oh, wow. I didn't
And
know.
I was so charmed. I thought, oh, we're just like the Kennedys. And I never really thought about the Kennedys or been, I wasn't like somebody who followed all of that or celebrity, but I thought that was sweet. And so a couple of years ago, when it was our 25th wedding anniversary, my husband got us a reservation to stay at the Grayfield Inn on Cumberland Island.
Oh, what a nice guy.
And you can only stay at the inn. That's the only place to stay, or you can camp. And so we dropped a mortgage payment and we went and stayed at the Grayfield Inn. And you have to get there by ferry. And while we were pulling up alongside the island, I was looking at it, and it was spooky, with all of the oaks and the moss, and it's quiet. And I realized it would have been their 25th wedding anniversary too.
Oh.
That plane crash was just a few years after they were married. And all the hair stood up on my head, and I thought, oh, if I was going to write a ghost story, I said I was going to write a ghost story. Here's the place. So that weekend is the only amount of time that I spent on the island itself.
Okay.
But I have spent lots of time in the low country of Georgia, South Carolina. It's one of our favorite places to go. And I love rivers, and I love salt creeks and marshes. I love the ocean, but it's that marshy landscape that really appeals to me. So in this book, when I was writing it, I was particularly thinking about that with Cleo and where she would be set. I was so excited with this book cover, by the way, because they didn't put it on the beach. They put her with the marsh around her house like I wanted it. And there's a river that runs between Cumberland Island itself and the mainland. And it's a salt creek, so the tide runs both ways in a salt creek. And I loved that metaphor. It was part of the reason that I wanted to set it there. It was the idea of ghost stories, and what does that mean? What is a story? I think a story is a very spiritual thing. I think as humans, we are unique in that we tell stories. And we exist in a fixed point in time in our life at all times we're in a fixed point while we exist. But we can reflect on the past and we can dream about the future. And we do it all at the same time. And that's a story. That's how a river runs. It's how a story runs. And I think in those stories, we are the ghosts. It's a spiritual thing. And so that is how that landscape becomes a character to me for this novel. It's not really real, and it is real at the same time. I think the South is a myth. Our lives are folklore. Our history is folklore. You could go, as large as you want. Our country, our world, the way that stories work and travel is through spirit. And so that landscape of that place worked for me because it doesn't feel real when you're there. You feel so out of time and place. It feels so removed. And then setting Reverie as a fictional town, but it's sort of based on some of the real places that I have visited. St. Mary's, Georgia is one of them. That's on the coastline there. And I still wanted it I wanted it to be fictional, imaginary, just enough so the edges all stayed kind of soft.
Well, and one of the things I love about, because it was in this, and it was in the Lost Book of Eleanor Dare too, because that was set in kind of a surreal, not.
Yep, I always do that. It gives me a little more room to play,
But it's the language that you use. You use a lot of subtext in some of your things, like the hallucinogenic is the morning glory seeds, and so they're chasing glory.
Yeah,
and she lives at Kingdom Come.
Yeah.
And Reverie, like there's always a meaning underneath that, and I love that. Symbolism is a huge part of your books, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
it's easier to talk about some really hard things if you use some symbolism, I think. And I think that's part of why we tell ghost stories, right? Because there are things that are hard to talk about in our stories. And last night I was actually at the Margaret Mitchell House Museum here in Atlanta. It's part of the Atlanta History Center. And they've done a beautiful job at, kind of inspecting where Gone with the Wind came from and what her understanding was of history and where her understanding and her research came from and why it perpetuated so many myths. And I was really intrigued walking around the exhibit and thinking about it. And then also while I was in conversation for people last night, the director asked me about, how I write characters who are dealing with these magical elements, some magical realism, but they're still very grounded characters. They seem very real. And I said, I think it's because I don't perceive a difference. Like, I think the world is full of wonder and full of mystical things, and I don't want to be able to explain it all. I want to wonder about it and be curious about it. I want to think it's bigger than us, and so maybe that's what you're saying too. That it's all the same to me, and maybe that's why the symbolism is always in there like it is, because it's kind of all the same to me. I just see it that way.
I like that. So quickly, just as a quick question, I would call this a Southern Gothic. Like, it's called Southern literature. How would you describe Southern Gothic? Because it's a lot more than just writing a spooky story set in the South. There's a whole feel to it. It's a very special genre.
Yeah, I think, people expect when you say Gothic, they think vampires.
Right.
And when I think vampires, I think Southern. And I think not necessarily monsters, but metaphorical monsters, right? And that is maybe what I think about Southern Gothic. So there is the genre of Gothic, and you have good old Eddie Poe, who lived in the South. So
loved him.
I definitely claim him.
This is his season, so
yeah. But if you want to step into the Southern Gothic, it's a little different. It's about the culture of the South, and you do have the grotesque, and you do have the darker themes, and you do have the violence. And I touch on all of this in this book. And it's funny because I describe it as Southern Gothic as well, but then it's not hardcore, twisted, dark violence like you would find Flannery O'Connor writing.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, is it? Maybe it is. The racism is there. It's just sneaky.
Yeah. And well, then
it looks pretty from the outside, right? But then you have the moldering mansions, and you have the things that are falling apart from the inside out.
And I think that there's from my point of view, as a tried and true New Englander, we've never left Massachusetts or Vermont. We're here, but we've been here since 1620, and we're not.
Are you scared now?
No. But New Englanders have a very different way of telling a story than the Southerners. Southerners take their time. These books are there's a tone and everything to it. It's not just it's set in the South. Its voice is Southern.
It's haunted. There is religion involved in it. And a lot of religious language is involved in it. A lot of spirituality is involved in it. A lot of folklore is involved in it. It's an old story being told over and over again, I think.
Yeah. And well, I thought that's with Eleanor Dare. I haven't read The River Witch, but now I have to. But I mean, and I've read some other people who write Southern lit, and I've noticed that there is a age to it.
Yeah.
Whereas, New Englanders, we never met a short sentence we didn't like. We're get to the point type of thing. So I love that. So, all right, we're just about done, but we always ask our authors 2 questions. One is, what are you working on?
Oh, no. Gonna make me, it's like you're jerking me out of my little hidey hole. I just turned in a proposal, and I'm actually kind of leaning into that Southern Gothic a little bit with this next one, and I'm leaving the coast. This one is set in Asheville, North Carolina. We turned it in on the same day the storm hit. I couldn't believe it. My agent was like, "We didn't do this, right?" I said, "No." So it is about 2 spinster sisters. It's a historical, and they have been living in the same house together for 30 years, refusing to speak to one another.
Oh, that's a Southern.
Yeah. So in 1926, they were in love with the same boy, and he left the older sister jilted at the altar, and the sisters know what happened to him, and it's why they haven't been speaking. And in 1964, when they are about to leave their ancestral home, they open the door to the new owner, and guess who it is? And he does not appear to have aged a day.
Oh, wow.
The book is called The Winter Bees, and I will just keep it at that.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
Yeah.
All right, and our other question is, what's on top of your reading pile?
I am reading.
I know you're not doing a lot of reading because you're on book tour, but.
Yeah, but I am reading Daniel Mason's Northwoods right now.
Okay.
I had a friend tell me I needed to read it, and it is fantastic. Like, I am sad that I'm on tour and I can't read it fast. Like you were talking about trying to finish my book. I keep trying to sneak more in. You can't read it fast. It's a beautiful book.
Oh, good. All right, I'll put that on my list then.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate you coming. I am very sorry that Donna couldn't make it.
I'm so sorry I keep calling you Donna. We have her here in spirit.
That's it.
Barb
is here in spirit.
We have her here.
I think part of the reason she's sick is she's also in the middle of a book tour for
I know.
The World Fell Silent, and she's on deadline. The book landed, right as her book was due. Her other book was due. No. She's trying to do both, and I think that there's only so much a person's body can take.
I cannot. I write so slow. There's no way I could do that. I would be so overwhelmed.
She fortunately is a fast writer, but I think she was burning the candle. So
yeah,
I'm sorry she's not here because she was really looking forward to this. I know she really enjoyed the book too. And you were like a little breath of fresh air in her.
I'll send her a message.
So thank you very much. The book is called The Fabled Earth. Everyone should read it. It's the perfect read for October. It's also the perfect read for November. So go ahead and read it. And thank you much. I would tell people what's coming up next month, but I don't know because I'm actually on a cruise for 2 weeks. And
yay for you.
Yeah. You know how you had the mortgage payment for your 25th? This is the mortgage payment for our 35th. And so Donna's doing everything by herself, and I have no idea what she picked.
Well,
So, I know
congratulations.
she has Kate Thompson coming in to talk about historical
boy.
mystery. So, because I know she's coming in, but I have no idea what the book she picked is.
Fun.
So people will be surprised when they find out. But thanks again, and I really appreciate it because I know you have a really busy schedule right now.
Thank you so much, Barbara. It was fun, and I'm telling you, you make me sound good. I'm gonna hire you.
We love the book. So, all right, we will talk to you soon, and thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.